Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Maryann Petri. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com, as well as on Amazon. I also have an announcement. Please notify your Attorney General in your state regarding solar panels made by Sonova or Generac Systems. If you're having any difficulties with this company, please notify the Attorney General in your state. I have a return guest on. I have Dr. Reagan L, PhD on. She's an adjunct global online professor of business marketing and management. She teaches students from India and Ukraine as well as other nations. Moreover, Dr. Reagan is a tutor of business, social science, American, European, Ukraine, and France history, ESL and French, basic Italian, and Bible study. She also holds 4 master's degrees and a PhD. Her friend Orlando and she are in the process of starting a nonprofit mental health online organization called the Great Leap Forward Education. Her hobbies include dancing, karaoke, yoga, exercise, watching sports, and science and technology, and alternative music. And she definitely admires Eli Manning. I totally welcome you back, Dr. Reagan L. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're going to have a good lesson on the history of Ukraine.
Yes, this is kind of what sets the stage for a lot of what's happening now. Ukraine has unfortunately been genocided for over 300 years and by Russia. And
Hmm.
a lot of it is because of, Putin's misinterpretation of history. A lot of that stems from them saying things about how Russia was the one who started Kiev Rus when in actuality Kiev Rus in 988 was actually a Ukrainian prince Volodymyr who married a French princess, and they started they started the idea of the Ukrainian state, and that started Kiev, very
Hmm.
very cultured, and the Ukrainian language started to come out of that. And truthfully, Russia, as we know, actually took the name from Rus. They So Russia is not an original name. They took the name from Rus. Moscow or Russia wasn't even founded. It was called Muscovy until 1121. So it was almost 200 years later that the Muscovites were even in existence.
Hmm.
The Russian language didn't even exist. And and then in 1721, Catherine and Peter the Great were really the ones that kind of started this genocidal attacks on Ukraine. They never wanted them to be a sovereign state. They were always trying to take them over. Even in the 1800s, Taras Shevchenko, who was a very famous Ukrainian poet, had written a lot of poems about the genocide of Ukraine and how horrible the Russians were treating them. They would ban their language. They Russified them for all those years. The Ukrainian language was banned. Ukrainian books were banned, and this also continued into the Soviet Union. Um, Ukraine had a stint of being an independent country from 1917 until 1921, until Lenin and the Bolsheviks took them over by force. Uh, and and again in the 1920s, a lot of their intelligentsia, and the same thing in the 1960s, were killed just because they were Ukrainian. And this included professors,
Hmm.
writers, artists, many people in the arts. A lot of people in different cultures, and they were murdered merely because they are Ukrainian. In fact, even some Ukrainians were always credited as Russians, and a lot of people thought they were Russians when they really weren't. For example, Igor Sikorsky, who invented the Sikorsky helicopter, was actually Ukrainian,
Hmm.
and so is Mussorgsky, who did pictures at an exhibition, composer. That the group Emerson, Lake and Palmer actually redid in a rock and roll format. He was actually Ukrainian, which is why they have a song called "The Great Gates of Kiev." You know, uh, and also it's pronounced Kiev, not Kiev, because if you say Kiev, that's the way the Russians pronounced it.
Hmm.
And it goes back to, of course, George Bush Sr. when he made his Chicken Kiev speech, which was ridiculous. It was very pro-Russian. and that was not very pro-Ukrainian. Everybody wanted to reset relations with Russia, and that was a major problem. The only time that Ukraine really had any kind of peace from Russia was maybe from 1991 until maybe 2000, 2011, but it is when it started to turn for the worse. But even in 2007, uh, Putin had said to George Bush that he doesn't believe that Ukraine is a state. It was a real country. And George Bush kind of looked at him like, "Why did you say that?" It was kind of strange. Um, and even today, I mean, there's a lot of propaganda. There was a lot of back in 2014. Well, actually, let's go back to 2004. 2004 was the Orange Revolution, and that was kind of the first time that the Russians were trying to do some influence, but of course they didn't succeed uh, because they were supporting Yanukovych, and the people wanted Yushchenko. And the reason it was called the Orange Revolution is because Yushchenko's favorite color was orange. Uh, and that happened exactly the same time that Eli Manning became quarterback of the New York Giants. It happened at the same time. So that was something I remembered.
Hmm.
And you can see when you saw the revolution, you see a sea of orange because everybody was holding orange flags because the Russians were infiltrating and into a false election, and because Ukraine is an independent country and has free and fair elections, they wanted Yushchenko, and they won that one. And there was no blood. It was a bloodless revolution. It was very peaceful. It was just protesting, and they succeeded. It was very successful. Now, fast forwarding to 2014, that was called the Revolution of Dignity, and this is kind of when the war in the Donbass had started. I know a lot of people think that the war in Ukraine started with the all-out invasion in 2022, but it actually started in 2014, particularly in the Donbass region in the eastern part, and that is Donetsk, Luhansk, uh, and Zaporizhia, Kherson, and the illegal annexation of Crimea. And what had happened at that point, this was right before the election of Poroshenko, uh, Yanukovych had promised, because he was the president at the time, and he had promised to go towards the European Union, and then he reneged on his promise because he wanted, cheap gas, and he wanted a better relationship with Russia, and he was an oligarch, working for Putin. So, of course, he fled after the revolution. He fled to Russia, and that's when the Russians actually came in. And I can recall when when Obama had said to Putin, "What are those little green men doing on Crimea?" Because these little green men did not have any kind of insignias. This is how sneaky Russia was. So eventually, they didn't want to deal with him because Putin is a racist. So he dealt with the vice president at the time. And At that time, Obama had closed the embassies and had issued sanctions, and also had, really kind of kind of delineated and kind of detached his relationship with Russia because of what they did to Ukraine. And and of course, the Russians weren't too happy about that. Um, and they illegally annexed Crimea, and of course, then they started to go into the Donbass region, and they took over Donetsk, Luhansk, and then, like, of course, after the all-out invasion in 2022, they took part of Zaporizhia and Kherson, but they claim like they took it all, and part of Kherson was already liberated, but they still claim that they have it. So that's part of the Russian propaganda is they claim things that they don't have. Russian state TV lies all the time. You can't really take anything they say you have to take it with a grain of salt. Uh, I would be more trusting of the Russian media monitor and the Moscow Times. They're independent and they tell more of the truth than Russian state TV. Lavrov and Soviet and all those, they work for Putin, and all they do is lie. So and they keep saying the reason why they invaded is because of NATO expansion, which is a lie because NATO did not expand. In fact, at the time in 2014, uh, the only thing that the Ukrainians were talking about was going to the European Union. Uh, there was talk about them going into NATO in 2008 with Georgia, but it never went into fruition. Uh, for some reason, I don't know, it just never happened. So it was a lie. The only reason why NATO expanded is because of the invasion, and it expanded with Norway and Sweden. Because Norway and Sweden had no intentions of joining NATO until after the invasion. So that was another absolute lie. And there was a lot of lies even recently, talking about Zelensky, and this is coming from Russian, our current administration as well as from Russia. Russian talking points saying that Zelensky is an illegitimate leader because they don't have elections. Unfortunately, you cannot have elections during martial law. And there are several reasons for that. Because number one, uh, the Constitution forbids it because the war is on their territory. So, you hear people say, well, in the United States during World War II, we had elections because we didn't fight on our soil. You know, all the countries who have constitutions and fought on their soil did not have elections. In fact, the United Kingdom did not have elections under Churchill because it was fought on their soil during World War II. So you cannot have, it's not safe either because especially the Russians are constantly shelling. They don't hit military targets like the Ukrainians do. The Ukrainians will hit things like oil depots and military targets, not the Russians. The Russians hit cancer hospitals, a children's cancer hospital. They'll hit maternity wards, playgrounds, kindergartens. This is what they hit. And they turn around and lie and say they only hit military targets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are so full of you know what, you know.
Yeah, I
I
do
mean, they're
remember
so
hearing that.
yeah, it's terrible. It's really terrible. And this is what they do every day. They're constantly shelling Odessa. They're constantly shelling Kherson, Kharkiv. It's just terrible. And if you remember what happened in Bucha in March of 2022, the Russians turned around and called that staged. I know people who were there.
Hmm.
People were, that was not staged. They actually murdered people in cold blood on the streets. They would just go up to people and just shoot them right in the head. It was horrible. I mean, they're cold-blooded murderers, and that's exactly what Putin is. And I know, like you deal a lot with courts. He's wanted. Speaking of courts, because I know that's your specialty.
Well, kind
He's
of.
he is wanted by the International Criminal Court, known as The Hague. He's a wanted criminal.
Hmm.
He is he goes to any country that signed on to the Rome Statute, onto The Hague, he can get arrested. Unfortunately, Mongolia didn't comply, and they were on the Rome Statute when he went there. He is a wanted criminal. He has taken Ukrainian children and russified them, take them from their homes, russified them, and brainwashed them and making them little soldiers. This is what he's doing to you, making them hate their own country, hate their own families.
Hmm.
That's genocide. That is against the Geneva Convention. Everything they're doing is against the Geneva Convention. This is cold-blooded genocide, and nobody's doing anything about it. And that's why I want to let people know about this, because I know a lot of Americans are not familiar with what's happening over in Ukraine.
Hmm.
And another thing, a lot of Americans think that our money or our tax dollars are going to Ukraine. That is the furthest from the truth. All the quote money that is going to so-called Ukraine is not even leaving America. We are building the weapons in-house, employing Americans. The only thing that the United States has given Ukraine is old weapons. F F-16s because we use F-35s. All right. Um, Old tanks, old Abrams tanks, things that are not even usable by us anymore because we're using the later models. But it's good enough for them. That's what we're giving them. When people turn around and you hear the current administration call uh, Zelensky the greatest salesman in the world, or when they say things like, "Oh, him is gravy train," he's not getting any money. His country is being obliterated in some ways. you know and when they turn around and say the whole country is devastated, no, not the whole country, but many parts of it. There are parts of Ukraine that are still standing, and their people are very resilient. There are parts of Ukraine that you wouldn't even know there's a war, except when you get a few, when you get the air raids and you get some of the shelling, and you hear some of the drones that come around. But generally speaking, they can still live their day-to-day lives in some parts, especially in Western Ukraine. But Eastern Ukraine, a lot of that is devastated. Prekos is like the newest one that's devastated. Um, most of Chasev Yar, most of Chasev Yar is devastated. There's so many other cities that are completely devastated. There's rubble everywhere. One thing I notice about Ukrainians, though, when there is rubble, they clean it up so fast. They clean it up so fast. They're very resilient. Another thing that Russia does is called double tapping. I don't know if you know what double tapping is, but what double tapping is when you have first responders, and you bomb the building, and then you kill the first responders. That's called double tapping. This is what Russia does. They kill first responders because their whole idea is to obliterate the Ukrainian state.
Mhm.
They are trying to obliterate Ukraine off the map. And this is why this war criminal belongs in The Hague.
Mhm.
Speaking of courts again, I know that's your specialty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's what you concentrate on, and he is wanted by the ICC for all,
Mhm.
as Putin, for all the horrible things that he is doing, and all his cronies. And all of them are just nothing but criminals, and they need to be thrown in jail
Mhm.
or executed. That's how
Uh,
bad it is.
Yeah, some people tell me that The Hague doesn't do much at all.
Yeah, well, the problem is the enforcement. Yeah, that's the problem. It's the enforcement.
Hmm.
And a lot of countries are at fault because, like, look what Mongolia did. Now
Hmm.
now Putin had gone to Mongolia. Now he was supposed to, the Mongolia government was supposed to arrest him because they were on the Rome Statute, and they didn't do that. That's what the problem is with The Hague. It's not so much with the court itself. It's because the countries are not cooperating and not enforcing it.
Hmm.
You know, and that's the biggest problem. If the countries would actually enforce it like they're supposed to, yeah, then it would do a lot more. And the European Union is like the only ones that are really enforcing it. They're the only ones that are really strengthening anything with The Hague. The Hague is, by the way, is located in the Netherlands. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
located in the Netherlands. You know, um, but that is somewhat true. But a lot of it is because of the countries that are signed on to the Rome Statute, like Mongolia, are not enforcing. They're not actually doing it because they're afraid of Russia.
Hmm.
There's too much appeasement. It's almost like 1938 all over again. What happened in Czechoslovakia in 1938? And that's the appeasement with the Molotov-Ribbentrop appeasement clause with Hitler. With Stalin was appeasing Hitler, and then you had, because at that time the Soviet Union was actually on the side of the Allies.
Hmm.
And the Americans were trying to appease Hitler because nobody wanted a war. But what they don't realize is that bullies need force.
Hmm.
As Ronald Reagan once said, peace through strength. You know,
Hmm.
and that's the way. And sometimes I think to myself, if Ronald Reagan knew what was going on, he'd be rolling in his grave. You know, I mean, it's really sad what's happening. I mean, he always fought against the Soviet Union because he knew that was the evil empire.
Hmm.
He coined that phrase, the evil empire, and that's still the evil empire.
Hmm.
You know, so I just, and then when the current administration talks about, it says that Zelensky has 4% approval rating. That's not true. he has a 57% approval rating. And there are sources that prove that. I've seen several surveys to prove that.
Mhm.
And one of them was from Professor, I don't, his name is Professor Gertis. He actually is on YouTube, and he's actually a professor one of the southern universities. I forget which one, but he actually did some research on it, and I know a lot of other people who have done research on that. And he has that Zelensky actually has a 57% approval rating. When he was elected, he had a 73% approval rating, which is very high for a democracy. You
Mhm.
know, extremely high for a democracy. Uh, but you want to ask me something?
Oh, sure. Dr. Reagan, I mean, what was going on in Russia with the Russian Revolution with Tsar Nicholas and Alexandra, and Lenin took over and he made everything worse, or was it already worse in Russia before Lenin stepped in?
Well, I mean, it was pretty bad, because there was no middle class,
Hmm.
so it was pretty bad. One of the reasons why the White Russians were defeated by the Red Army, which is the Bolsheviks, was because the Tsar wasn't doing much better. You had a very rich or a very poor, and you had serfdom, and you had like feudal. It was like very feudal. I mean, even feudalism was gone in most of the developed world, and like by the 1700s or 1600s, that was pretty much gone. That was when even the 1500s was the age of discovery, and then you had the age of enlightenment, and you had everything was a lot more advanced. But in Russia, it was still kind of feudal. They were a little more backward because of the structure, with the very rich and very poor. Um, that's usually why countries turn to communism. But we know communism is a horrible system.
Hmm.
The same thing happened in China with the Long March with Mao Zedong when he defeats Chiang Kai-shek in 1949. These things happen generally in countries that have serious problems. Because actually, any country that's doing well is not going to want communism.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that was another thing too. When after the Bolsheviks took over, you had three Holodomors. Now, Holodomor is a fake famine. And during Stalin's time, well, one was in the 1920s, the biggest one was in the 1930s, and there was another one in the 1940s. And the Holodomor was a fake famine against the Ukrainians again, where 4 million Ukrainians died of starvation when there was plenty of food because of collective farming, because they made the quotas so difficult to attain merely because Stalin wanted to purge the Ukrainians. So he figured that was the best way of doing it. This is the suffering that these people have gone through. And
Hmm.
they are probably some of the most intelligent, resilient people on the planet. And I know many Ukrainians. I have Ukrainian students. I deal with them almost every day, online. I'm constantly connecting with Ukrainian people, and I know it. I mean, I can't feel what they're going through because I'm not them, but I can certainly empathize with the horrors that these people are going through. And it's so evident. And when current administrations and people make statements like, oh, they're like there's no Ukraine left, or Ukraine is never going to get their territories back. That's negotiating. That's conceding before you even negotiate. That is not how you negotiate. You're supposed to negotiate from a period of strength. Hasn't anyone taken lessons from Ronald Reagan? you know,
No, no.
I mean, seriously, you have to go from a position of strength when you negotiate. One of the reasons why the Ukrainians went into Kursk, which is in Russia, is because they wanted to negotiate from strength, so they can say, okay, uh, if you want us, if you want your territory in Kursk back, give us back the Donbass
Hmm.
and yeah, that's the whole point of that. That was the whole point. So again, we're talking like a legal negotiation here, because those occupied territories were taken over illegally. So this is where international courts can be involved. we definitely need to, get international courts involved. These are war criminals. They need to be tried as war criminals.
Mm.
Just like during the Nuremberg trials. When uh, of course, Hitler never made it to the Nuremberg trials because he committed suicide.
Mhm.
But a lot of his understudies, a lot of the Nazis were tried at the Nuremberg trials. Well, we need something like that to try these war criminals because they're no different than Nazis. And that was another thing. They turned around and said, like the Russians turned around and said that the reason why we went into Ukraine is because we wanted to demilitarize them and get rid of the Nazis. They're the Nazis, not the Ukrainians. There's no
Mhm.
Nazis in Ukraine. Their president is Jewish. Seriously, it makes no sense. You know, I mean, Zelensky is Jewish. You know, he was born in Kivy, and he's which is in eastern Ukraine, and he was brought up Jewish. In fact, I believe his grandfather was one of the people who was in a concentration camp,
Mhm.
so he knows what it's like.
Mhm.
So when they say things like that, it just makes no sense.
Mhm.
It's just totally absurd. To say about Nazis and biolabs. I'm sure
Mhm.
you've heard that one. Oh yeah, there's biolabs. That's why we go and destroy hospitals because they're biolabs. There's no biolabs. It's all propaganda.
Mhm.
And this is what I'm trying to, educate people about. It's propaganda.
Mhm.
It's, excuse the expression, horseshit.
Mhm.
It's, it's pure horseshit. I
Mhm.
mean, that's what it is. It's there is no truth to it at all. It is total propaganda. You know.
You were telling me before the other well after the other podcast that one of your friends went through a bombing of some kind.
Yes, somebody I know. I wouldn't say a friend, but somebody that I know was in Odessa,
Mm.
and he's actually a pastor. He's an American. He was in Odessa with another person by the name of Zhenya, I think was his name, and they had gone between two buildings, right, and it was right during a bombing, and there was glass everywhere. The only reason why they didn't get hit is because they hid between the two buildings,
Mhm.
and this was right during. This happened about 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it was in Odessa. It was one of the bombings of the Russians. It just it was some long range missiles and some drones,
Mhm.
and they were just raining down on these people, and the building, there was glass everywhere. I mean, you could see from the outside, it was glass all over the floors, all over the street, everywhere. It
Mhm.
was terrible, and they're lucky they're alive, both of them. Yeah. So it's just terrible, and that's why people need to realize what's really going on. And the people really need to understand that this is not this this is not propaganda. It's what the Russians are talking about is propaganda.
Mhm.
When they start talking about biolabs and all this nonsense. You know, the sole reason why the invasion happened is because of what happened in 2014. They didn't like the idea that the um, that the Ukrainians did not want to be part of Ruski Mir, known as Russian world. That they wanted to be part of the European Union and eventually NATO because they want security. They don't want just any peace. And then they turn around and say, "Oh, Russians want peace. If they want peace, why do they keep bombing people, bombing
Mhm.
civilians?" Right? And then they turn around and say the Ukrainians don't want peace. No, they want peace, but they want a just peace.
Mhm.
They want a standing peace. They want their territories back, and they want the Russians out of their country. Simple as that. And they want to guarantee that the Russians are not going to come back in 3 to 5 years because they don't want just a ceasefire where what's going to happen is then in 5 years they're going to come back, they're going to regroup, and they're going to come back and invade again.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's what
sad.
it's terrible.
Mm.
This is the fear that these people have to live under constantly. And that's why I want this to be I want this to be out to everyone. I want everyone to hear what I have to say, you know, because I want everyone to know what's really going on, you know, and it's really, really a very serious situation. You
Mm-hmm.
know, Ukraine is a peaceful country. They've never bothered anyone throughout their entire history. They have been desecrated. They have been bombed. They have been attacked by Russia, and for no reason other than Russia wants to control them. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same reason why do men abuse women? Power and control. Well, it's the same thing. They want power and control over over Ukraine. They want them to be part of the Ruski Mir, the Russian world.
Mm-hmm.
And the only security guarantee is being in NATO. And everybody is kind of delaying that. And I think it's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. Mark Rutte, who's the head of, the General Secretary of NATO, needs to really start making a path for Ukraine, because that is the only way that we can guarantee that Russia is not going to attack again. Because if you notice, Russia doesn't really attack NATO countries. They do other subliminal things in getting involved in their elections, like they did in 2016 with the American election, and like they did with getting Fico, the head of in Slovakia. That guy is very pro Russia. You know, and that other idiot Orban in Hungary is
Mm-hmm.
another one that's very pro Russia, and always try to cut funding, for the they're always trying to cut funding. Excuse me a second. Okay. They're always trying to cut funding for the for Ukraine, for military aid to Ukraine, and it's just terrible. It really, really is terrible. So I just want everyone to know, what this country is going through, and I want everyone to realize that this is not like America spending money, continuously, just uh, giving foreign aid, because that's not what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
We're giving them old weapons that, and we produce everything in house. So the American workers are the ones that are getting the jobs, not Ukrainians. And there's no gravy train in Ukraine, and there's no constant sales and money going to Ukraine. In fact, they were thinking of doing a Lend-Lease Act, very similar to what happened in World War II, where they actually lend lease and then they would pay them back. But they can do that with Russian assets. You have so many Russian assets right now in Western banks that can be utilized to pay for some of these and to rebuild Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
That would save a lot of money, and also by having the European countries increase their defense budgets, which I think is a good thing. Everybody has to help.
Mm-hmm.
They have to increase their defense budgets, and they are doing it, which is a good thing. They are stepping up.
Yeah. But then
Uh,
they have to worry about Russia attacking, like you said. I mean, how how can you guarantee that won't happen again?
exactly, exactly. And the only way is to keep NATO strong. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and 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 Ukraine needs to be part of NATO, because if you remember, if you go back to 1994 with the Budapest Memorandum, all right, in the Budapest Memorandum was supposed to be a guarantee with because Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom had signed it, and they made at the time was Leonid Kuchma was the president of Ukraine, uh, and it was basically having them give up their nukes because they were worried about when the Soviet Union collapsed, they were worried about all these individual countries having nukes. But when you look back on it, if Ukraine still had nukes, they would have never gotten attacked.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another reason. The fact that they gave up their nukes was another problem. They actually gave up during the Budapest Memorandum. So that was a real horrible. I mean, that document was about as useful as toilet paper. I
Mm-hmm.
hate to say it. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. I
Yeah.
mean, it was horrible, and unfortunately, they did that, and and now, of course, Zelensky said, and he's right, he said that was the biggest catastrophe of the Ukrainian history. Because had they had nukes now, maybe they wouldn't be going through all this. Because Russia has nukes. You know, it's like when Macron of France said, when Russia was, threatening everybody with nukes with their red lines, and Macron turned around and said, "We have nukes too."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's ridiculous. So that's why, it's just, if they still had nukes, maybe this wouldn't have happened because they would have been on equal footing. And that's basically what Macron was trying to say. We have nukes too, so you want to nuke us? No, it's an unwinnable situation.
Mm-hmm.
And now recently, I don't know if you heard this part. Recently, the Russians had attacked the shield of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Now that was horrible. I don't know if American news covered that, but that happened
When was
last.
that?
It was about, I think, last week. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was very recent. Yeah. Thank God there was no radiation released because of the shell that was put around the power plant to protect it, which was financed by France and the United States and a few other countries. Uh, so that's the only reason. Yeah, in fact, that they started funding that during Obama's administration, and I think the first Trump term was when it was finished in 2018. I think that's when they finished. So it took a few years to actually complete the project, but it was funded by several countries. France, I think, was the UK, and a few others. And that really has saved the power plant. But the point was that Russia had the nerve to do that. you know, and that's what Russia does. I mean, they destroy everything. That's their whole thing. It's just to destroy Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
and they do it every single day. Every single day they have air raid sirens. Little kids can't even sleep. They have to have their education in a bomb shelter.
Mm-hmm.
This is what children go through.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be educated in a bomb shelter. I mean, I agree that the bomb shelters are cute and they try to make them as nice and kid friendly as they can. They really try to make them really nice, but they're still bomb shelters. You know, I mean, they try to make like the science one. I remember seeing a picture of one of the science ones, and they showed them little planets and cute things. They try to make it kid friendly, and they do, and they try to make it as nice as possible. But it's still underground and it's still a bomb shelter.
And it's
You
not
know,
the same.
Exactly. It's not the same as having a regular classroom. They do the best they can, and the kids, are okay with it because they try to make it as kid friendly as possible. But the point is, like you said, it's still a bomb shelter.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how they have to educate. Some areas they can't even go to school; they have to do everything online. You know,
Mm-hmm.
because of the bombings and everything. It's like this. In some ways, they're still living like COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
We did under lockdown.
It's a wonder they
And
have
this.
internet.
Oh, thank God they have internet.
Yeah.
But going. You know, um, it's just terrible. And that's part of what they depend on. And there's a couple of other ones too. There's I think another one that Kiev Telecom I think is another one I forget. I mean they do have other ones, but Starlink is like the major one that especially helps on the front lines too.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's they use a satellite communication and everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's why a lot of countries are trying to, and a lot of individuals, are all trying to, donate to keep it going because this way, Musk can't threaten. You know, so it's not an easy situation. We're all trying to do what we can. In fact, the Baltic states are amazing. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
like Estonia started this organization called NAFO, which is like a takeoff on NATO.
Mm-hmm.
It's North Atlantic Fellows Organization, of which I'm a member.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, because I'm a cat lover, they're all about animals. It's like they show like the logo is a dog, but mine's a Professor Cat because I'm a cat lover. I have two cats, so
Mm-hmm.
so I have two cats. Ukraine is the female and Eli is the male. And but NAFO is basically was started in Estonia with the 69 Sniffing Brigade. And what it is basically a fundraiser for trucks and other vehicles for the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm a member. I give a very small amount, but something, it's better than
Mhm.
nothing. So
Mhm.
actually, my name is on one of the trucks, but it's all the way on the bottom because they actually do it like in ranks, like military ranks. So
Mhm.
I'm considered a private because I don't give that much. So I'm a private. So my name is on the bottom of one of the trucks.
Well,
It's
that's
on
cool though.
the front lines.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's pretty nice, even though I'm on the bottom, but it still makes me feel proud. So, and everybody's trying to do what we can because
Mhm.
obviously the government in Ukraine doesn't have a lot of money,
Mhm.
and with everything that's going down, how they're being just how the I mean the eastern part of Ukraine is being destroyed by constant Russian shelling. And they keep having to rebuild as they go along. That's one thing they do. They try to rebuild as they go along. But there's some places in the eastern part, like Chasiv Yar and places like Prokhost and other Avdiivka. Some of those places and Bakhmut are just totally destroyed. I mean, there's nothing left.
Mhm.
There's just nothing left, just rubble in some of those places. I mean, there, the other, Kharkiv is still standing well. Kyiv is still standing well. Lviv is still standing well. Odessa is still standing well, but they do get shelled. But they're still, but they're able to, rebuild as they go along. But
Mhm.
those other places in the Donetsk and Luhansk region, those places in the eastern part, they've been shelled since 2014. So a lot of them, and it's really bad even now. So a lot of them are just it's just total devastation. There's just nothing left except busted buildings, in
Mhm.
those areas. You know, so
That's a
it's
shame.
it is a shame. But there are places that are still resilient. That there are places where you can go to Ukraine and actually, see a normal living.
Mhm.
Like when people turn around and say, like, say you go to Lviv or you go to Kyiv or you go to Kharkiv, there's cafes, there's restaurants, normal buildings, everything looks normal. And when there is a bombing, they try to, clean it up as soon as they can. But somebody had said, why, during wartime, why are Ukrainians still having fun? Well, they can't not live. They don't even
Right.
know what tomorrow's going to bring. So yeah, I mean, their attitude is, look, they may die tomorrow.
Mhm.
So they don't know if they're going to even make it till tomorrow. So they're going to enjoy life while they can and live to the fullest. And I don't blame them. You
Right.
know, 'Cause a lot of them have even told me that. I've asked students and things like that, and they said, I've asked because I was asking a couple of my students because I noticed that people were criticizing, and of course I support my students and I support the fact that they want to enjoy their life. And they
Mhm.
said, we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Mhm.
We could so many families have been, torn apart because of this war.
Mhm.
Little kids losing mothers and fathers on the front lines. You
Mhm.
know, I mean, I remember one that was very touching was a reunion. I saw this really very touching reunion between a daughter and her mother. Her mother was on the front lines, and she was doing something at school, and they didn't tell her that her mother was outside. And then you see, she comes in and because the mother was a soldier on the front lines, and she comes in and then you can see the reunion between the daughter and the mother. It was a tearjerker. It was really really emotional. Because this is what they've separated. So when they reunite, it's beautiful. And
Mhm.
the other thing too is when it comes to prisoners of war. Now, the Ukrainians treat their prisoners of war very well. They
Mhm.
they comply to the Geneva Convention. They get free internet. They get food. They get health care. They're allowed to, you know, they can work there. They can do stuff, and they're well protected. But the Russians, they execute the
Mhm.
prisoners of war. There's been many that were executed in cold blood. One guy was smoking a cigarette and just happened to say Slava Ukraini, which means glory to Ukraine, and they shot him right in the head just
Mhm.
just for saying Slava Ukraini.
Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible,
Mhm.
and these are horrible things, and just horrible, and they treat their prisoners of war absolutely horribly. So of course when they actually do a prisoner of war exchange, and the people are reunited with their families. I mean, they're so happy, because they're out of there. A lot of them lose a lot of weight because they're not fed properly. It's just horrible, but they're so happy just to be on Ukrainian soil and to see their families again. You
Mhm.
know, so so I just hope that, people, listen to this and realize what's going on over there. And I just hope that, people realize the propaganda and, that people like Tucker Carlson and some of these other people, spout, and Russian talking points. And just to realize that, that they really need to either go to Ukraine or listen to what Zelensky has to say and listen to Ukrainians, and that's how you're going to get the real news. Really careful with social media, and you have to be really careful with the sources of media.
Mhm.
That's why I believe in. I listen to what the Ukrainians say. I go by the primary sources, and I
Mhm.
listen to what Zelensky says because
Mhm.
they're there. With people on the front lines, like that person that I told you about, that was caught in that crossfire in
Mhm.
Odessa. He's been to the front lines.
Mhm.
You know. So I listen to what he has to say. He's been there. He's brought humanitarian aid to the front lines. So he kind of knows. He's an American, but he goes back and forth to Ukraine.
Mhm.
He's been doing that for 26 years. He's been going back and forth to Ukraine for 26 years. So I tend to think that he would know a lot more than somebody from CNN or Fox News,
Mhm.
or any of these other news stations that have never even been there, you know, and
Mhm.
even like these social media accounts or these or have never even experienced anything in Ukraine, or if they have been to Ukraine, they've been there for 1 week and that's it. They never really saw anything, you
Mhm.
know. You have to really experience it, you know. So I think that's basically basically all I have to say is I just really want people to realize, and I hope that I've enlightened
Mhm.
some people. When they hear this, I hope they become enlightened, and I hope they will become more sensitized to the Ukrainian cause.
Yeah, those people are suffering.
Yes, they really are, and there's no reason for it.
Mhm.
There's absolutely no reason for it.
Yeah,
It's totally avoidable. We just have to have peace through strength. We
mhm.
have to stop Russia. Russia must be defeated.
Mhm.
That's it. They have to be defeated. And that is the only way that this will end.
Well, I'm so glad you came on to speak. How can people reach you if they have any questions?
The email is fine. You can give them my
Okay.
email.
Okay. I'll
If they
put that in the podcast notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
You could even give them my phone number if you want, if they really want to, if they really want to, talk to me. It's just that I generally, when I don't recognize a number, I usually wait for it to go to voicemail because I get a lot of telemarketers.
Oh, I know that. Yeah, I'll leave your phone number out. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't put it in, I mean, I don't want it all over, but like, if someone wants to get in touch with me, you can give it to them, you know. I would
Okay.
do it that way. Like if someone says, "How can I get in touch with her?" You can give it to that person, you know.
Okay.
Okay. But I don't want it like all over the place,
Right, right. I know. Hey,
Yeah.
don't jump
Yeah.
off, okay? Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help people understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube. Please like and subscribe, Apple iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and other platforms I don't know about. Again, feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. Thank you, Dr. Reagan, and I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you.
Okay.